That's what admissions is doing, putting together a class that's going to have people just vibrate off of each other and make each other grow, challenge each other, and make it an interesting experience that you won't stop talking about.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Get to Be School. This is your host, Drex, and I am grateful that you're here. Thank you for spending this time with us. I hope you're doing well. I hope you're spending time with people that you love and that everything's going okay for you. Things are wild and busy over here. The new fall term just started, and it's going to be a good one. I'm taking Selling Yourself and Your Ideas with Craig Wortman. Going to be a fantastic class. Really excited about it. The episode this week is a great one. Eric Lucrezia comes to us from Paris. He helps applicants get into schools all across the globe. It's a very universal experience, a very interesting experience. He's got 20 plus years doing this thing, so he knows a thing or two about a thing or two. And I'm grateful that he would take the time to come on the show. We're just going to dig right into the episode. There's a lot to cover. If you know anyone who should be on the show, or if you should be on the show, please reach out. I want to hear from you. If you haven't already, please consider leaving a 5-star review and subscribing to the show. Really helps. Besides all that, besides all the business, please reach out if we can do anything for you. Other than that, let's get right to the good part now with Eric Lucrezia. Eric, thank you so much for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Drexler.
This is a thrill. You reached out because you know Oren. Will you give a little bit of a background into how you know Oren, but also just yourself personally? We've only met today, so I can't do too much of an intro.
Yeah, I'm an MBA admissions consultant based here in Paris, France. Although you probably can tell from my accent, I'm American. I grew up in New York. You mentioned Oren. Yeah, he and I know each other because of the association we're both part of. It's called AGAC. It's kind of a mouthful, but it stands for the Association of International Graduate Admissions Consultants. Been around for about 20 years. And it's kind of like a seal of excellence. All consultants who are members are vetted, and we adhere to a code of ethics, and we have very strong relationships with the admissions people at all the top schools.
Awesome. I love that. So you've been doing this for a while. Can you give a brief background into kind of how you came to be an admissions consultant? What led you there? Give a few highlights.
Yeah, I've always worked in education. It's funny because my studies were biochemistry with the intention of going into something medical. And I discovered somewhere along the way that I couldn't handle blood. So this was out. I was like, okay, well, I have this background in science. Maybe I'll get a master's in education and I'll teach. So I did that all the while I was working at a university in New York called Long Island University. And I discovered I loved the whole admissions and recruitment world. I was really enjoying that. There's the travel aspect. There's like the kind of international element. You're helping people reach goals and sometimes get scholarships with that too. So I was working there full time, but on the side, even back then, and this goes about 25 years ago, I was doing some early on admissions consulting for, freshmen, right? So that is to say people coming out of high school, and I was really affordable. Like the prices I was charging 25 years ago. Wow. Often it was like some people I know, my parents, friends, and their kids or whatever. And I would for $1,000, I helped them out throughout the year, and I would look at their essays and help them fill out the FAFSA, like the financial aid forms, help them prepare the interview. So I got an early taste of it. Fast forward, I worked at that school for a bunch of years. I worked in admissions. I worked in student leadership development. And then I moved around. I lived in Spain, I lived in Australia, and I've been in Paris, France for 15 years.
Whoa.
So in various capacities, always in education, sometimes on the career side, sometimes teaching English, working with people on public speaking. The last job I had where I wasn't self-employed was at ESSEC Business School, which is one of the top French business schools. And I was the director of recruitment for the MBA program. And I was there for about 6 years. I loved it. Again, the travel, the international aspect, helping people. I mean, as you kind of already picked up when we were talking off camera, I love connecting with people and finding what makes them tick. And so this job just made sense for me, working with people to help them, first of all, to get to know them and to kind of point out where they shine and help them to communicate that in the case of an application through essays, through their resumes, through an interview, and so on.
I love that. So more than 20 years of experience here. And I think it's always very advantageous when admission consultants or coaches, as they're sometimes called, when they have real behind the curtain experience. Can you talk a little bit about how being on the other side, being in admissions, has helped you in your coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, you understand what the admissions objectives are. You understand the inner workings of that office, right? They have certain targets. They obviously want to, maintain quality and increase that quality. They want to maintain and increase diversity. So it's about attracting people from different cultures or various elements of diversity. to put together a class that's interesting. When I was working at ESSEC, I would often, it's kind of a joke, but not really, sort of a metaphor, like when we're putting together a class, if you're planning a dinner party, for example, and you want to have a dinner party that will be unforgettable, you want to have the most interesting, diverse, different, unique people to have great things to say to make it an unforgettable experience. And in a way, that's what admissions is doing, putting together a class that's going to have people just vibrate off of each other and make each other grow, challenge each other, and make it an interesting experience that you won't stop talking about. It kind of helps feed the next cycle of recruitment, because you say, wow, it was such an amazing experience. I met this person and that. My network is growing incredibly. So that's part of it. And then also I got to know the pain points of the applicant. As I was traveling around the world, I mean, gosh, when I first started at ESSEC, it was super small, and then we grew, and that's how I became the director. But in the beginning, I was traveling to like China and India, and then I was in Latin America, the Middle East, and got to know the different challenges people faced depending on where they're coming from, the different misperceptions often they would have, and things they struggled with. So I was naturally helping them. I had targets as, in the recruitment side, so I wanted them to be strong applicants. I was already coaching and encouraging, giving advice and so on, critiquing their essays before they would submit officially. So I was developing the skill set along the way without realizing this is what I was going to do in the end.
I want to dig more into these challenges you were just referring to. You've been doing this for a while. You've seen the landscape shift and change. What are some challenges of today's applicants that you're seeing?
Today's applicants, I mean, the elephant in the room is obviously artificial intelligence, right? I mean, it's taken a life of its own finally. We've been talking about it since probably the 60s, right? Go back to like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We've always imagined this, giant machine robots with guns taking over the world. And yet, it was much more of a slow arrival, much more subtle. What's changed, and I think most people would agree, that ChatGPT busting on the scene in late 2022 was when it became on the forefront of everyone's mind. It democratized AI. It made it useful and fun, by the way, because you can have conversations, you can make it generate funny little stories, you can tell it to make a image of an armchair with the face of Freddie Mercury if you wanted, silly stuff. And so suddenly it was available. AI now has permeated the psyche of admissions people in terms of what do we do with this? How do we know if the applicant is real? There's been a lot of, I would have to say, fear-based reactions. And I think that's evolved in the 2 or so years since it's been present. Now, if you talk to admissions people, the assumption is you are using it, and let's not even pretend we're going to be able to stop it. There was talk at some point, maybe especially last year, about AI detection tools, like, oh, we're going to catch you. But the problem with that is there are way more false positives than accurate responses. So we've given up on that, I think. And the assumption is you're using it, but here's the thing. We need to use it intelligently. And this is something I find myself talking about with many of my colleagues in AGAC on my podcast, MBA Waves. How do you go about using AI intelligently? And it's a few things. One, I think it is a great research tool when you want to figure something out. So it's a great way to start because you can go a lot faster. It scans the whole internet for stuff, but you've always got to go back to your sources, because your Bible, so to speak, if you're applying to, for example, Kellogg, Northwestern, right, is going to be their website, right? That's your source of truth. In terms of crafting essays, I think it is a great tool for idea generation. You have a sort of vague concept of what you want to say, you've had XYZ experience, you have ABC goal, putting it in there and seeing what it comes up with. And it may be totally off mark, but the fact that it tells you something that you disagree with starts to shape an idea in your own mind that you can now write about. The moral of the story is it can never be a copy paste job. If you ask Gemini to say, okay, write me the perfect 500-word Wharton essay, for example, what does that mean? First of all, what is the perfect essay? Doesn't exist, And today in 2025, there is no tool that can write an admissions essay that is authentic, like your story, that is compelling and interesting and exciting, that really captures the triangulation between you, your goals, and the school you're applying to. It's just not true that you can do that. So I think you can use it to a point to get some ideas going, and even to reduce word count, maybe to refine a little bit of messaging. All of that stuff is useful, but do not copy and paste. Another thing that not everyone thinks about is you're risking some kind of plagiarism in the sense there. These are other people's ideas and words. Not only is it maybe potentially taking enough text that you don't realize you're inadvertently plagiarizing, but it's also kind of taking the average sum of all these ideas. And what does that mean? If you do a copy paste situation, you're going to have a very average, boring essay. So use it, but be smart.
See, I love that approach, especially this notion of accepting the fact that it's out there. Gone are the days that we can pretend like people aren't using it. But on the other side, the whole copy and paste, when I wrote my applications, it was no AI. It was borderline sketchy at best. I personally don't really know how to respond, but I love the thought of, hey, it's out there, use it well, use it ethically and effectively. So I appreciate you sharing thoughts on efficacy, not just ethics.
Absolutely. These are tools that the expectation is that you know how to use them when you graduate. I mean, even when you think about like kids, let's say high school age, they're going to be at an advantage for getting a job at a high school and certainly at a college if they are AI fluid. The expectation is there. At the same time, there's another risk, and that's AI dependency. And there's that MIT study that came out a month or two ago that I think is fascinating, talking about cognitive debt. And it's like there's this sort of very careful line we need to walk about teaching our children, but also adults, how to use the tools, but not becoming dependent on it. And I make the comparison often about, let's just ask the question, how many people's phone numbers do you know? I don't even know my partner's phone number, which is a problem. But I mean, like, I remember people's phone numbers from the 80s, like my friends' parents. Still, I remember, totally this stuff long term.
I do know now my wife's phone number, but it took me like a year. But I remember Slade Child's phone number, who I haven't talked to since second grade.
But now we don't need to. We have phones that are this like secondary brain, basically. And so just imagine AI having that impact on every facet of life. Brain rot is a thing.
Loved that about the challenges and just the whole AI landscape. What are you seeing applicants do really well right now?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just seeing the value of an MBA. And I think the main reason why MBAs remain valuable and useful still in 2025 is because the schools are really good at adapting to the current situation, the current climate of technology change, environmental change, political change, social change, and, responding to that or even anticipating that and being leaders in setting what is important for training leaders for the future. That is, I think, one of the biggest values. Another value of MBA still, I think, is just the soft skills. In 2021, this article already dates, this article that I had written interviewing a bunch of MBA grads and asking if the MBA was still valuable in 2021. This question comes up cyclically, and it's often related to economic cycles. And so it's like, is MBA still worth it? This question has been asked every, let's say, 3 to 5 years since forever. And talk to my older colleagues or more experienced, shall I say, colleagues in AGA, they'll say, oh yeah, like this comes up every so often. So often what you hear them talk about is soft skills. And it's sometimes surprising. One of the number one things that comes out of their mouths is you learn how to time manage like you never thought was possible before. So it's just like getting your brain to a level of just managing multitasking or prioritizing, knowing what to say no to. Another thing that I found surprising they talk about is humility, how to be a strong leader and courageous and confident and not be a jerk. And, not insult people, not alienate or ostracize people, not offend people, and not push people out of your organization. As a leader, you're hopefully building people up because you know how expensive it is to recruit and train people. If you're annoying or offending your team, they're not going to stay. People need to feel valued, respected, to feel that their work means something. That's all in the whole box of seeing the value of an MBA. But what else I think clients are doing right is spending a lot of time on the GMAT or other tests. I think it's kind of obvious. They hear about it from older colleagues or whatever that, this takes time. Some people, they, like, especially in Asia, where their native language is very different than English, which is obviously the language of the test. They'll just plan like, 6 months or whatever. Some even like quit their job for like months. And just, they understand the time needed for the test. That's true. And the other thing I would say is using AI, and like that, the way it's being used, as I just mentioned, a bit more nuanced, a bit more intelligently, a bit more ethically and responsibly.
I liked in your notes that you sent over, you're a fan also of the GRE versus the GMAT and other test formats. Just hit on that really quickly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, both tests have evolved in the last couple of years. The GMAT is an exam that is designed for business school. The GRE is designed for all kinds of grad school programs. So the GRE is much broader, and I don't know the numbers for people who take the GRE. But in terms of people applying for MBA programs, it's about 50-50. But like if you ask people, like say you're at Kellogg, right? So the admissions director at Kellogg, right? What percentage apply with a GMAT versus GRE? They may say something like 40 or 50%. And then there's the EA, the executive assessment, also produced by the folks who make the GMAT. So that's GMAT with a C. And as the name suggests, executive assessment is designed for executive profiles and executive MBA programs. However, more and more schools are accepting the EA in lieu of the GMAT or GRE. Columbia and NYU were both early adopters, but more and more getting on with that. And I think that may be GMAC's approach to maintain some of their market share with another alternative test by getting schools to agree to take that. And it's starting to come to Europe too. There's a couple of schools that are apparently accepting the EA as an alternative to these exams. Other admissions folks have said something like, oh, no, not into the EA score. It's a shorter test. It's an easier test. Why would I compare that to someone who's worked hard to get a competitive GMAT score or GRE score? when they've just taken this one. But sometimes people will submit both kinds of tests. It sometimes works out for them. And I think what these test scores do is they reassure the admissions folks that this applicant can handle their rigorous academics. It's largely what it's about.
Something that you're talking about just now makes me want to ensure that we cover when you have to help applicants decide realistically which schools to apply for. How do you have those conversations? Let's just call drastics, like give outlandish examples. What do you say to someone who scores a 200 and then wants to go to Stanford? How do you have those hard conversations about realistic expectations?
You said 200? Anyway,
Is that even possible? I don't know.
I think it is like, yeah, it's like the SATs for writing your name on the test or something like that. I probably am honest to a fault in most areas of my life. But anyway, yeah, when I'm meeting somebody who's a potential client, they contact me for a free consultation. I'll have lots of questions to understand who they are, what their situation is, what their goals are, give them some initial advice. And, if they're like way off the mark, I'll tell them, of course. Also tell them things they can do to get closer to their goal. You have to be realistic. They have their list of target schools, that their dream schools, so to speak. I always tell them, I was like, most people come with this list that's based largely on rankings, scholarships, or location. And fair enough, those are real factors. But I think that once I get to know them and I understand their values a bit more, and what their priorities and goals and all that kind of stuff, based on various things like the expertise of each individual school and their network and their teaching style and their core values. Once I know them, I can say, okay, now that I know you a bit, I think these schools would be great for you, and I think you should consider them. Please have a look. However, this one that's been on your list, I have some doubts, and here's why. Nothing against that school, but it just doesn't seem like a match now that I know the guy or girl a bit more. And, here's some other ones. So, then they kind of look at that updated list. It's obviously their choice, and we go from there. But at the end of the day, I advise them, look, I'm never going to tell you to not try to shoot for your dream, So you have some, like we call reach schools that are perhaps unlikely, but let's try. You never know. And have some schools that are more like what we call target schools that seem to be, from what we can estimate, on par with your profile and skill set and so forth. And then maybe one or two safety schools, so to speak. Not a school that you would not want to go to. Like, it has to be a school that you would still respect and feel that you would have a great experience at and during and afterwards. But it's just not your first or second choice.
Yeah, those are hard conversations. You need someone to chat with you through those, and not someone who's just going to pat you on the back and kind of endorse your unrealistic expectations. With the few minutes that we have left, let's pivot to advice. What do you really want to share with people considering business school or people early on in their applications?
Yeah, sure. I mean, besides the admissions consulting, I do some presentations and workshops at schools. And one of the things I find myself doing often is this presentation that I call What I Wish I Knew 5 years ago. And it's not 5 years ago for me, but more like for their future self. First piece of advice, the sooner you start, the better. Some people are like, oh, yeah, I'm thinking of applying. Let's say right now we're in September 2025, and they're talking about 2026. It's like, it would be great if you had started researching and maybe taking the GMAT 2 years ago, right? But, hindsight is always 2020. So we deal with what we've got, at the time. But I mean, if somebody comes to me, and I have clients that are kind of like long-term clients that I'm working with them on this sort of like 2-year basis, right? And it's a very slow and steady thing. And it allows them to have experiences, to try new things, to maybe add, like, I don't know, a volunteer experience to their profile, to really try to show their boss or manager that they have what it takes to make it to the next level. So perhaps a promotion, some things like learning another language, even if it's a basic level. I mean, in the United States, people very often don't value as much learning another language. Where here in Europe, it's like very common that people speak 2 or 3 even. And I think that speaks volumes. Even if you plan to stay in the US, that's a huge added value. In addition, just the fact that your brain can operate in more than one language, I think it gives a certain agility to your thinking, that it's not necessarily about, like, they may not need you to speak Spanish, but the fact that your brain can think in 2 different, I don't know, ways, it just makes you a more agile thinker, maybe a better problem solver, perhaps more empathetic to other cultures and have, curiosity and that kind of thing, and just a better leader. So yeah, I think language is a massive skill. Okay. So yeah, number 1, start earlier than you think. 2, learn a second language, even if it's just basic level, like get on that Duolingo. And now they have like bots or like AI things that you can talk to, and it feels like a real conversation. 3rd, start test prepping early. Bang out the test like a year or more before you plan to apply. This way you can focus purely on the research process. And it's something that I call researching and soul searching. It's like very much like diving into the school websites, but talking to lots of people and then sitting with yourself and reflecting. Sometimes it's about journaling. I often like encourage my clients to write essays for themselves. It's like kind of these practice essays that that just the act of writing, I think, helps you get ideas out. You discover things about yourself. So it is a lot of soul searching. Like people often tell me after they've, gone through the process with music, I feel like I've just had gone through therapy. I'm like, yeah, I know everyone says that. And I talked about this in another podcast called Leadership Syllabus I was recently on. Self-assess, like in terms of like your leadership style, like even people who maybe like you're 28, I believe, and maybe you're already managed a team of people. But if I were to ask you, what's your leadership style? Most people say, I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. It's kind of like how we speak English. Like you just know how to do it. You don't really realize the proper rules to conjugate verbs in English. You just know because you're a native English speaker.
Yeah.
So same thing with leadership. Like some people would just do it, but they never really took a pedagogical approach. That's one thing I work with my clients on. Like there's a very simple article that I share with everyone. It's the same one I've used for years, but it really does the job and kind of examines a dozen or so leadership styles. Then I ask them to think about which ones resonate with you. This way you can sort of like put a name on what you're already doing and then think about the leadership style you want to have in the future. Like maybe you don't love the way you lead. Maybe you see improvement or room for improvement, which is a very good thing because if you're planning on doing something like an MBA, like having goals and like a vision for the future version of yourself is very useful. Not only for yourself, but also to demonstrate to the schools that you have a vision, which means that you understand why you're applying to this particular school and you understand what particular resources that school has that you want to leverage during your short time there.
I think the timing of this interview is not serendipitous, but really fortunate because a lot of these things that you're saying only work if you're following the first piece that you shared, which is start early. Learning a second language, that's not something you can do if you're cramming your applications in a matter of a month. But here we are, it's fall. A lot of people are probably just maybe starting to think about next round one. A lot of people are going to be working on round 2 and 3, but I'm excited for someone with a long stretch of road in front of them to hear your advice. So many of these things, internally thinking about your leadership style, the second language, the AI considerations, so many great things. And I really appreciate you sharing.
For folks who don't have the luxury of 2 years ahead of me, it's a lot of runway time. That's just an ideal situation. I'll be very honest. Most people don't have that. I'm going to meet people throughout the next weeks and even months that are going to say, okay, listen, it's November 1st. Do we make this happen for, round 2 in January to start this September 2026? I'm going to say, yeah, we're going to be focused and we're going to absolutely make that happen. But, I'm speaking a little bit in ideals. If people are hearing this and they're thinking about an MBA some years down the road, well, this is fantastic that they can hopefully take on some of these suggestions, but it doesn't mean that you have to. Everyone has to do this by any means. Frankly, most people don't end up doing that. But these are suggestions that I think in an ideal world, people starting early would benefit from.
Excellent caveat. Excellent caveat. So, Eric, thank you. Can you please share where can people find you?
Yeah, probably my website for my MBA admissions consulting website is Candidate Coach. So the website is www.candidate.coach. There you can find all my social media. I mean, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I pretty much built a summer home there. But I'm always posting on there. And, anyone listening is welcome to interact with me there and connect with me. As I mentioned, I have a podcast called MBA Waves. So that you can find that on Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, whatever platform you prefer, and the YouTube channels as well. So I'm both named MBA Waves or Candidate Coach. So
this has been so fun. MBA Waves, Candidate.coach. I'll make sure it's all in the episode notes, but thank you so much for making this time and stepping away from beautiful Paris for a second.
My pleasure. Great to meet you. I look forward to seeing the final result there.
Do you watch a lot of baseball?
No, to be honest, not really. I mean, I've been living in Paris for 15 years and it's not the most popular sport here. Here it's all about smoking.